This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board, and we're in Pledge Drive. Dave, want to tell
about Pledge Drive. We're next door with Heartland Pathways and Educational Resources, and we're sort of in each other's pockets to some extent. So you have to realize that this is community not-for-profit organization. WEFT is doing community service. It's a very good music station, but it also needs to do community work. And we do a lot of environmental stuff. When we came here, when ERS came here before WFT, there were 4 storefronts here, virtually empty. And we went to the Kroger Foundation to see if we could get 4 nonprofits in here. We didn't exactly succeed because Kroger Foundation said there's, you don't have any collateral. If you had a need for a heart wing and you have a hospital, then your hospital is collateral. It's a good idea, keep in contact with us, but we can't do anything at the moment. But we did get Rubel, who was not a non-profit, but he was sort of on the side of that, and WEFT and ERS and Heartland Pathways. And I have to give WEFT a lot of credit for helping us to do our thing. This last Friday week, we opened the Kickapoo Trail to which will eventually be 25 miles to Danville. The first phase of it, 7 miles, was opened. A whole slug of people there, and lots of bicyclists and lots of hikers. And we have also, well, that amounts to $12 million for the whole 25 miles. It'll take a few years to get it into action. It's wider than we hoped because it takes out all of the remnant prairie that we have. It's but to some extent, that and the 33 miles in the Monticello area, which predated the rail banking era, WEFT has to take some credit for that sort of involvement. At the outset, people would have me in as a moment of Monk. And gradually the moment of Monk rolled into 2 hours of Monk. And then, in somewhat of a conservative fashion, we stripped the jazz and old-timers. And the stripping was designed to allow people to listen to jazz at a certain time of the day. But it threw most of the non-profit sort of community action people into the weekend, and that was a little traumatic because on the weekend that's when we are inactive, and it's also a time when people are at church and thinking about those sorts of things, and so that sort of balance is very interesting. I just had someone looking in our crazy window that is a single parent with 4 children and doing planning, and she's looking at natural areas in urban spaces, and we have a pocket prairie that falls into that category. So we did a quick survey of the area, and I think she'll be back to talk about this being a kind of interesting street which had coffee shops and fronts that were interesting, but clubs and 30-bed brothel nearby, and sort of a raunchy street. Now, can that be replaced by restaurant tables and we lose the pocket prairie? I'm not sure about that, but You have to be thinking about these things. So now, let me transfer to David, because he needs to say something about he's been a manager for some time of this station, and is not at the moment, but he helps us out a lot with computerization of this program and putting up on YouTube so people have access to it. So he will say something about the pledge drive.
Sure. So I've been here, this is at least my 25th year doing these. And since we've always done at least a couple every year, that means we're looking at my 50th anniversary for doing pledge drives. It's really straightforward. It's sort of the same concept as a union. Individuals by themselves can't accomplish a whole heck of a lot. You can be a really noisy, very distinctly heard voice, but if you get a bunch of people together and you're all on the same side, you can accomplish a lot more. One person making one donation to WEFT does good work for us. We appreciate it. But what happens if we can get not just 1 or 4, but 40 or 400? Our goal for this pledge drive is $15,000. That's extremely modest. Do you realize that if we got 100 people to make $150 pledges, that's a big pledge, and that's more than you need to get our special one-of-a-kind T-shirt that features someone in this room who is not me. That would be it. We would be done. Let's be more realistic. The basic membership level here is a mere $40. If 200 people call in and make $40 pledges, that gets us well over halfway to our $15,000 goals. 200 again is not a small number, but if 4 people call this show and 4 people call in Shruti and 4 people certainly are listening during Women Making Waves, and even if you don't call during these shows, and even if you don't call today, it's really important, especially these days when our budget is especially tight, to hear from those 400 of you or 200 of you making pledges at the $40 level, just the basic membership level. And that will do a huge amount to keep us going here. Again, the total goal for the next 2 weeks is $15,000. The phone number here, we have somebody, operator is standing by, so please call us, 217-359-9338. That is Fly Weft. She's jumping up and down for joy. So give her something else to do, but jump up and down, why don't you? Call 359-9338. And now we'll get back onto the non-money part.
When we opened the rail trail the other day, there were people coming up that have known us for 30 years. And they said, you don't know me, but I've listened to your program for many, many times. And so once again, you have to also know that this has extensions. So what WEF does with their non-profit thing allows people like gospel people to come in and do interesting things. And so it's not just WEF you're helping. You're helping other people who, with their non-profit agencies, are having a hard time in the difficulties that we have at the state and federal level. So onward and upward. Jack Paxson is here. He's retired professor of agricultural crop production and physiology and aflatoxins, and he's retired to California, but he has his foot still in Illinois. And tell us what an aflatoxin is. Oh, I had a piece of a plant that is a weed that it might be a very good biochemical thing.
Yep.
So.
Well, aflatoxin is a compound produced by the fungus Aspergillus flavus, and it is toxic to your liver on any animal, and is a problem when the crop gets contaminated before it's eaten by people or animals. And so it's a serious problem in some areas, particularly where the crop is not stored under the best conditions. So it's a thing that you can prevent from being formed by proper crop handling, but is not something that you want to have in any of the stuff that you eat or the animals you feed eat.
Yes, it seems to me they're having problems at the moment, perhaps with grapes in Europe. They're toxins that come with some of the pathogens that invade grapevines and the like.
Sure.
And you can die from some of these things. That's the advantage of having a farmer's market, where you don't. Jack's talking about how you store things. These are items that are coming straight off trees or out of the ground, and you're getting them before they get infected with toxins.
Well, another advantage that I see to farmers markets is that the produce you eat is in fact fresh. It has much better flavor. Michael Pallon pointed out that the average article on our plates travels 1,500 miles to get there. And if that's the case, you can imagine what a ripe tomato looks like after it's traveled 1,500 miles.
Well, some things you can't even travel with. A papaya, it doesn't travel well.
Well, they ship them up from Mexico, so it travels.
But they ship them green.
That's right. That's my point, that most of the food we get is picked before it's ripe because it doesn't travel that well.
Bananas and apples.
Yeah.
And
Bananas a classic example. Most of them are grown in Central America for us, and then they're shipped up to Louisiana by train up to Chicago and distributed back down here where they're artificially ripened with ethylene. So they are certainly very green when they're first harvested, and most people in the United States don't know what a really ripe, a truly plant-ripe banana tastes like.
I have a specimen that we'll put up on the screen of a pepper tree, which is kind of a weedy tree in the south. It comes through from Brazil, I think, and it's got some biochemicals in it that are sometimes very minor but rather important. They may take over the fact that we've used and abused biochemicals and the diseases we're trying to control have become adapted to them so that they're not affected anymore. So can you say just something about the chemicals in pepper tree, or it might be out of your field?
It's out of my field because it's not a native to Illinois. But there are compounds in many plants, and pepper trees included, that are designed to sort of get their space in the ecosystem, if you would. They are allelochemicals, which then suppress the growth of other plants so that you can, particularly if you're growing in an environment where the resources are limited, particularly water, like in the desert, why you can reduce competition for resources that you need, just like humans.
Yes, well, just to remind you that the state has preserved 0.01% of its remnant prairie, and that same thing happens. There's something out there in that gene pool that you may need in 500 years for a disease that you don't even know about now. And if you get rid of it, you don't get it back. So we're very jealous about remnant prairies, and that goes back to whether we should have really large, wide trails through our only remnant prairies that are important.
An important point there is that the prairies are the things that created the deep, rich soils we have here, and yet we don't have many good examples of prairies to study how that soil forming process took place.
Yes, and it has very good geology. It came from the Laurentian Shield in Canada, and so it is in many places a very deep soil, so you can work it and abuse it too. But the prairie, the plants that did grow on it, are part of the complex of things that make our soils possible. Part of it is vegetation, part of it is the animals, part of it is time and the ability to meld that together, say 10,000 years, and just with water that's available and things like that. So, well, Jack came here after his PhD, I think.
Yep.
And he's become acclimatized to this territory. He's married to Sally, and unfortunately Sally died of cancer. And we like to tell you some of these things so you know the people as more as a personality. He's now married to Sharon, and we'll have her on. She's a social welfare sort of person, and we'll have her on in more towards the fall. But Jack lived near Brownfield Woods, and yesterday they were out there looking at Clement Cemetery. And if you know Clement Cemetery, it's just across from the gate to Brownfield Woods. So why were you at Clement Cemetery?
Well, my wife Sharon Mundy and I have become interested. I'm 81, so I'm realizing that I'm not immortal, that when we die, we would like to have what's called a green burial. And that's one in which you're not embalmed, you're buried in a biodegradable structure, generally a shroud or even a sheet, cotton sheet, and you go back to nature where you came, very much like the pioneers that settled this area. When you died in those days, they just dug a hole and put you in the ground. And so we're looking at places and trying to discover what's involved in finding a place that will accept you for green burial.
Yes,
and
often you have to have a casket and be hermetically sealed in a coffin, and it costs you thousands of dollars.
Sure.
And theoretically, that's because the body might rot and leachate might go into the water system, but you have some ante to that.
Well, sure. I mean, we're part of nature, believe it or not, and planting us in the ground like a seed is very much parallel in that most of us don't have an accumulation of anything that's particularly toxic, or we wouldn't still be alive. And so the threat of someone being buried in the ground is really quite minor for other people in the area.
The justification sometimes is because there are spores that it can be in bodies like anthrax in sheep, or, and that can stay over. But it's sometimes it's a justification that's extreme. And
yes, definitely extreme. Most of the soil, as Dave has pointed out, was created by plants and animals, but also very important in this process is a huge number of microorganisms. And bacteria, fungi, earthworms, you go on down the list, huge list. And all of these organisms collectively produced the soils that we have here. So any organism that's a pathogen to humans, for example, would have a terrible time surviving for long without a living human around to grow on. So I think the threat from pathogens from somebody that's been buried in the ground is minuscule to vanishingly small.
so we hope that you can do something, perhaps with Clement Cemetery. I'm very sad about cemeteries because they've been good. There's little private cemeteries, sometimes with 2 or 3 trees in the middle of the cornfield, been given over to the township supervisors. And my recent visit to Jesse Cemetery near Villa Grove was very disappointing because that was loaded with prairie, and now it is mown. There's hardly a pair of prairie. A year or so ago, there were 2 or 3 prairie plants like sulfiums that have deep roots that came back through the mown territory. But now the gravestones have been herbicided around, and there's mown, and it just is so disappointing to see that small piece of our heritage disappear. And Clement Cemetery is mown, but it's in an area of interest. So let's transfer it now to a little bit of the geophysics of that area. Jack has lived there for a long time, so he's very familiar with the Yankee Ridge Moraine. It runs up towards Rantoul, and we've been talking about that recently. And he's been involved with the Salt Fork River and preservation of the pristine nature of the Middle Fork. No, the Salt Fork. And say something about Brownfield as a part of a big grove. And
yeah, there was a huge grove of trees that extended from Urbana to basically Rantoul in when the first settlers got here. And of course, as anyone living in this area knows, that grove was completely obliterated, or virtually completely obliterated.
It's Busey Woods and Brownfield Woods.
Yeah, Brownfield Woods and Busey Woods. But even Busey Woods was
A regrowth.
Yeah, it was regrowth because it was developed in different aspects. Trelease Woods was another small remnant of that original forest. It's a bit like the prairies that were here, in that they were mostly obliterated for commerce. And
If
so
you got your lumber out of the forest, you lived in the forest with freedom from the prairie, which was mosquito-laden and sort of swampy and wet. And so the first post office was just a mile up the road from where you used to live.
yeah, Augerville.
Yes, and there was a blacksmith there on the corner, and it was a little community, and that's where Banner was first. It was someone who donated money or land in the Boneyard Creek area, which brought Banner to its present place.
Right.
So this moraine separated the water that went east to the Salt Fork, and went from the Rantoul area especially to the west, to the Sangamon. And then you had a Champagne moraine where water on the east went to the Ombrah and to the Wabash, and on the west it went to Kaskaskia River and into the Mississippi. So you need to know that sort of thing. Say something about the fact that the Yankee Ridge may have been an impoundment of water and a breakthrough of the Salt Fork of the Boneyard, or extended going through. So the river goes through the moraine.
Yes, that happens in many cases where, in this case, the loose material that forms the moraine that was pushed in front of a glacier is susceptible to erosion. And so if you impound a lake of water and it finds a low spot, it can easily erode a river valley through there. We happen to be on the headwaters of several rivers here, and I started a long time ago, 50 years ago, to fight yet another destruction of a river in Illinois, the Sangamon River in Allerton Park. We were trying to protect the park, and I would invite all of our listeners to the Prairie Rivers Network dinner on October 6th at 6 o'clock at the I Hotel. You need to make reservations through prairierivers.org, and I hope you will join us in these efforts to protect rivers, in addition to the forests, in addition to the prairies that we've done quite a number on.
In addition to the aquifers underneath.
Yep.
An southeast corner of Champaign County, there's going to be a mine. We're not sure whether it'll actually be, but it takes water. It takes water out of the pristine aquifer underneath, and then washes the coal and puts the tailings down old mine shafts, which probably have access to the aquifer. So this is something that you have to watch.
Absolutely.
And so you had a meeting on about irrigation and the aquifer, and you had several people there. And the first was Road Camp, and he interestingly was saying that some of this water that comes down, that runs off the Champagne territory, which has been sort of, you don't have sink places. And some of that is actually going into the aquifer, and they don't know how much, but it's doing it. And so we have an aquifer that's a little bit alive. Some of the western aquifers, like the Ogallala, you don't have a lot of input into the aquifer. You can say something. Jack has gone back to California where he grew up, and he has something to say about the aquifers under in the Colorado River?
Oh, yes. Across the country, but particularly in the West, aquifers are being really, again, destroyed. There are classic examples of this happening in the San Joaquin Valley, where the U.S. Geological Survey did a study in 1977 and found that the land surface had subsided 28 feet from the withdrawal of fossil water. That's taking water out that's in excess of what falls every year. The same thing is happening in the Ogallala aquifer that extends from Nebraska to Texas. In that case, Kansas gets 70% of its water from this aquifer, but it's mostly fossil water, and that aquifer is being mined, if you would, to the tune of about 3.2 trillion gallons of water a year. That's in excess of what falls as normal precipitation. Obviously, we can't continue that for long, but we're living in a fool's paradise at the moment, believing that we don't have to take better care of our aquifers, our water resources, our forests, our prairies. And so it behooves everyone to become aware of these problems and then set out to do something about conserving resources and reducing our impact on those resources we have.
Yes, you had a journalist there to encourage this sort of reporting. These are facts, and there's a lot of unknowns in these situations. Science doesn't know everything. That's why we've got scientists doing research. But you need reporters who are knowledgeable across several fields to take the concept to people. And Jack's been involved with that quite a bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned Allerton Park, but I can remember the day when you invited William O. Douglas, the Supreme Court Justice, to help to let people know what was going on in Allerton Park with the Army Corps of Engineers,
Right.
wanting to bank it up. And so was that an exciting time to have?
Oh, absolutely. Justice William O. Douglas came out to help our cause and walk through the bottomlands of Allerton with us, and to, again, as you state, to draw attention to the battle we had, where we were the small people going up against some mighty forces, and that the Army Corps of Engineers and the government and the politicians wanted the project. We pointed out that it was a very bad idea and ultimately won, but it took many years of struggle. And out of that struggle arose this group, the Prairie Rivers Network, which is functioning today and trying to continue that battle of protecting watersheds around the Midwest now. It's expanded from outside of Illinois even, but a lot of our efforts led to that sort of understanding that these impacts are serious and need to be modified or mitigated, or in some cases not done at all. I learned a very good phrase from Kenneth Boulding, who's a Nobel Prize economist. He said, "I've discovered a new name for the devil." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "It's suboptimization," which he defines as figuring out the best way of doing something that shouldn't be done at all.
Yes. And we've just recently had Bruce Hannon on to discuss, and there's been a levee that has been given his name behind Allerton Park.
Right.
So,
And Bruce is another very valuable resource for this community. He's done innumerable, widely different things to help
Clock
this
towers.
community. Yeah, clock towers, you name it. He's a special person, and I feel particularly blessed to have worked with him on the Allerton project. He and John Marlin will also be recognized at this Prairie River's 50th anniversary dinner on October 6th.
That's good. John has been in hazardous waste and things like that.
Right, and John also has helped establish the prairie that's just east of the president's house.
Yes, and his wife is mayor of
Yeah, right.
So, these things relate. You get to know. There's a small battery of leadership. And WEF finds that out too, and it's things like fundraising areas. The same 6 people are often the crew that keeps it going, and we need continuing support, and we need it to come from a new generation. So WEF was at the quad the other day, hoping to get hold of young people who will do more of this sort of work. And I think it's happening. I think they're realizing that this generation won't have the resources that their grandparents had. And they have to work at it to try and preserve things. So going back to the irrigation thing, we have a 9-acre prairie right on the moraine at the Bloomington Moraine at Rantoul. And there are pivot irrigations there. And
Yep.
and they take a huge amount of water, and they're way sky high in the air, so a lot of the water evaporates.
Yes, it's squandered like many resources. It's primarily been brought in by the corn industry, which needs water at the right time for producing corn, particularly pollinating corn. And I was surprised myself at this talk to find out that the center pivot irrigation at times takes twice the volume of water that Champaign-Urbana itself takes. So it's an enormous quantity of water that is used to grow a crop that we have problems. The farmers complain now that it costs them more to grow the crop this year in particular than they get back when they sell it. So,
yes. Well, there's another person in this is Clark Bullard.
yep.
And Clark is an engineer, and he's suggesting that there are mechanisms like you do something about the center pivot so it doesn't be so high off the ground. And there we have had a student from a high school student who's just been doing things with water run into the ground underneath. I don't know if you can do that with big fields, but that's important. Then we had another person talking who was from England, and I forgot his name, but he was breeding plants that could live in certain circumstances and not use so much water. And you have less stomates, for instance, or you have... So he was working with a genetic gene pool people. You have
Well,
any...
we continue to try and engineer ways of making more food, I think, in my personal opinion, so we can support more people. I also feel that the world is overpopulated already.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
It seems like a fool's errand. And so I think that we should be putting efforts into birth control and women's choice instead of trying to find out ways to subsidize and keep alive even more people that are doing this impacting on our Earth's resources.
Yes, some of the people who are having problems in Texas at the moment have 9 and 15 children. That's just too much for the environment. So, well, one of the things you're thinking about is the soil, and you'd like to be a keeper of the soil. And I would like to be a little bit more biodiverse than corn and soybeans.
Oh.
And, but to grow a potato or a carrot is a problem if you have a heavy soil. You need the carrot to expand. You're in agronomy, and you sometimes have some questions about what sort of research the College of Agriculture, or now NRIS, does. And tell us a little bit about your concept of how you grow vegetables in East Central Illinois, or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, clearly, again, I would support farmers markets where the things you eat are produced locally, so we get out of the long transportation which uses fossil fuel, as well as the possibility of getting vegetables when they're truly ripe and have developed maximum flavor. Also, I'm very concerned that much of the research is supported by agribusiness, which means that the small farmer doesn't get much support for figuring out how to deal with the problems he has. I would urge the readers or listeners to see the Price of Bounty, which was produced by the university back in 1990. It is available online if you simply go to Price of Bounty, University of Illinois. If you Google that, you'll find a reference to a digital version that you can watch on, and it deals with the contamination of our water by soil, by fertilizers, by pesticides. The city of Decatur is spending $92 million as we speak to dredge soil out of their Lake Decatur, because that's our topsoil that's ended up down there. I have a statement that says soil is our oil and we're throwing it away. And in terms of fertilizers, Decatur has to deal with the springtime levels of nitrate that are twice what the Public Health Service says are appropriate for public drinking supplies. And so we are throwing away nitrates and pesticides as well as the soil. And the people downstream are the people that have to pay the price. I think we should all be concerned about how we treat this earth.
So it's very hard to conceive how that sort of research and interest can be stimulated with a 1% that seems to control everything.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Dave. The problem is that the controlling interests have an agenda that wants just their particular problem solved as opposed to helping the public at large. And there was a program started by the USDA back in the 1980s called LISA, which stands for Low Impact Sustainable Agriculture. And that was stillborn because it didn't see the light of day once agribusiness found out that low input was emphasized. That's the last thing they want. So we need to somehow reestablish the fact that the university is set up to serve the public and not private interests, and in the process find ways of helping people learn to grow these vegetables you're talking about in a sustainable way without polluting the environment in the process.
I think we're looking for a slightly different lifestyle. We're looking at the production of food that way, but we're also looking for utilization that's different. The amount of food that is wasted in this community is absolutely horrendous.
Yep.
I get chicken food from people who understand what I'm doing. I can get tomatoes and peaches, and people are so attuned. If you go into a major supermarket, all the apples are graded according to size, and they're all covered with a wax that makes them look good, and it's not a pockmark. But we can learn to eat a pockmarked apple or a broken. Some of the antique tomatoes, for instance, look all cracked and wizened, but wow, the taste is wonderful, and they're good and healthy. So how do we change those attitudes? I go to Habitat for Humanity, and they have mountains and mountains of salvage. And this is very good. It's very interesting. But then what do you do with the salvage? Can you store it? Can you? So they've taken to getting, if items aren't lasting for a while, they take them and then throw them out. And I've been looking at that and wondering why that has to happen. And I'm talking to a board member from Habitat, And we have to teach people that they can have a repair. They can give people a job to put in an extra screw. They can put a light bulb in, or it absolutely appalls me to see what goes out to the landfill. Fortunately, just lately, we find that what used to be Solo Cup has an outlet for styrofoam, which has a big volume in the landfill. So, Jack, do you have any comment on that?
Yes. One classic example was I took a friend, Don Barnhart, on a canoe trip down the Saline, and as we were going by the old Urbana landfill, which is closed, we saw some sort of petroleum-like material leaking out of the bank. And so when I got home, I called up the city manager in Urbana, and I said, there's a problem you need to look at. And his attitude was sort of later, don't bother me. And so I went to the Illinois EPA, and they said, it sounds like something we should be looking at, but we are really busy and we won't be able to get to it for at least a couple of weeks. Then I went to a writer for the News Gazette, and he said, oh, it sounds interesting. I'll take a look at it with you. And he came out and he says, you've got a story here. The next day on the front of the newspaper was a picture of me pointing to this stuff leaking out. And by golly, by noon that day, the Urbana engineer was out there along with the EPA looking at this, putting booms on the river, and eventually they built a retaining wall so that they captured that material, which had everything you could think of in the book in it from this old landfill. And now they treat it and run it through the sewage treatment plant before it gets into the saline. And it was very easy because there were a lot of people in the public that were concerned about water quality and these sorts of things. And that's why the manager and the EPA came out there so quickly to look at it.
Yes. So there are jobs here. If we train people to do those jobs, if we put money into the community colleges and into the university to do applied work like that. So what you were doing was cleaning up the Salt Fork. So now I can stand on the bridge that is on our rail trail at St. Joe and look over, and there are fish in the water. Yep. And there are people fishing nearby. And I think that the younger generation is fewer, so that we don't have quite as many people, perhaps. And they're concerned about devices that might improve, like Clark Bullard was working with toilets. Instead of having 5 gallons of water to wash your brown away, you use a gallon. And the Australians are into the fact that they put their wash water on top of the cistern, so the wash water is used to flush the toilet. And California is, if it's brown, flush it down. If it's yellow, let it mellow. And that means you have to have people who will smell the smell of urine, and if it's left there for a while. So can we be less pristine? Little Prairie doesn't have as big of flowers. It has gene pool, but there's a drive to have bigger and better flowering horticultural plants that look good, but somehow we have to perhaps not have that bank of black-eyed Susans or other things. So you might have a comment there.
Well, certainly our whole agricultural system is designed on a strange premise that more is better. I retired and I made a phrase up from the university called agribusiness is like a bus. When you get on and ask where you're going and the reply is faster, it's time to get off. There's no direction, there's no goal, it's just more. And we can't obviously keep doing that. It's irrational. And we need to start rethinking how we do things sustainably with lower impact. And the problem in the crops like corn and soybeans is that they're all uniform. They have very similar traits. And as a plant pathologist, that was setting the banquet table for any creature that came along that figured out how to eat that. And there was a classic example in the 70s of southern corn leaf blight that swept through the United States from Florida to Canada in a growing season because every single corn plant had Texas male sterile cytoplasm in it. Now we're doing the same thing with glyphosate resistance and other properties because everybody wants to grow the best variety, and there's no diversity that you were talking about, Dave, in the prairies that made them so stable and would put up with things like droughts or floods.
One of the things that I'm reminded about is that it's more convenient and more economically convenient to have quality control on your things. So if you go to Europe where you have different soils and grape growing, and you have breweries or vintnering people who work with wine, there's a great difference between the successful event and the non-successful event. And the people who have a taste and a longing will know the years when something is very successful. The commercial people tend to iron all that out, so you have one species that does very well at one level, and you have quality control in your machinery and everything else. So I think we need to go back to some variation, and you get it some right in Champaign-Urbana with breweries. So how do you judge your brewery? I can remember living next to a brewery in Australia where the Mudgee Mud was sometimes very good, but sometimes a little muddy. The Grafton Ale was something in the same bag. So we encourage those people who are trying to do things like that. It also runs to the gross national product. The theory is that if we have more people, we sell more things, so we have to have more people. But really, it's the gross national sensibility that we don't want, rather than the gross national product. And that's worldwide. It's a constant move to do more and to invade the forests in Africa, or do things that mean that we reduce biodiversity across the world.
Sure. Yes.
And so we're talking to Jack Paxton. He's been a professor of crop science in the College of Agriculture when he was here. It's changed to ACES and NRES now. And he's retired. He spends part of his winter in California. So tell me, do you have a pet project? I have a suspicion that you have more than one pet project in California. Tell me how you want to reform the Californians.
Well,
we have one sitting outside taking
Okay.
our pledges, folks. Pledge drive. We need to call in. Just let the public know that we are a community nonprofit radio station, and we need your help.
And the Californian reminds us that that phone number is 217-359-9338. That spells out Fly Weft. So give us a call here at 217-FLY-WEFT as we find out how Jack would like to change Californians.
Well, I was, as Dave said, I was born, raised, and educated in California. And I have found that over the years, there's been lots of problems that have been generated by humans. We're living in what's called the Anthropocene, which means that geologic era in which man became the dominant geologic force. And out there in California, they have moved water from one end of the state to the other. They've moved land all over the place. And as a result, they've created lots of problems that they're trying to now look at. And we have to be very careful that we don't find solutions that create even more problems, which has in the past been the case.
Go around here.
Go ahead.
We just got a pledge drive.
Okay.
So
Hi.
you're on the air.
Well, no, I didn't get a pledge drive.
Oh, you didn't? Oh.
No, I was just saying call in because I'm standing by to take your call for pledge drive. As the other Dave said, it's 217-359-9338. Yeah, that's all I was. I'm sorry, Dave. Yeah, I would just wanted to say,
getting excited.
I was getting excited because nobody has called. I mean, I would like to get excited, to have somebody call. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I didn't.
And you come from California.
I just returned from California on Thursday. I grew up in the Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach area, if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Where do you reside when you're out there?
I was born in Oakland. Now we spend our winters in the San Diego area. So
I lived
south of
down.
you.
I lived in Vista for
Okay.
8 years as well.
Yeah,
so
we live in Lake San Marcos now.
Oh, literally right down the
Right,
road from
right next door,
Vista.
next door
Yes,
neighbor.
small world, small world. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just out there because Mom is still out there.
Okay.
But anyway, I was just excited because I just wanted to remind everybody to call.
You're on the board.
And I'm on the board.
And
And we're going to have a raffle coming up at Weft Fest.
And we have a WEFFest coming up on the 18th, I think.
No, next Sunday, the 10th.
The 10th,
The 10th from
okay.
1 to 6. We're going to have birthday cake and music, and we're going to have an amazing raffle with all kinds of wonderful prizes, and all of the proceeds will be going towards Weft.
And you have a daughter, Holly, that operates Red Herring.
I certainly
And
do.
they have vegetarian offerings.
And that will be one of the gift certificates at our raffle for the Red Herring Vegetarian Restaurant.
And your diet courier?
Well, I'm currently a nurse's assistant, as well as, again, very involved here at Weft. I'm the alter ego. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Going back to California, I help teach a class in the winter when I'm out there at University of California, San Diego, called Human Impact on the Environment. And the problem is we have too much material to cover. But there are lots of people that we found the students really like this course. Our attendance has grown from 40 when we started teaching it about 5 years ago to over 200 now. And they are becoming aware of things that they can help with, just like Weft Radio, so that you can get involved and change the world you live in, and I urge you to do so.
It's amazing what you can do with one person, like Margaret Mead or someone like
Yep.
that can do things. Writing is a help. Telling people about your family and your friends and exchanging ideas is excellent. There's big discussions about how we have families. There's a lot of hospitalization of people for birthing, for instance. Can we do more? What do you call it? Doulas and
Home delivery?
home deliveries and things like this. How do we take people who are living in 5-story buildings in downtown Champaign and give them an opportunity to do something different, like work in the environment?
Well, that's been part of the problem, because there's even a book written by a fellow who wrote for the San Diego Union Tribune called The Last Child in the Woods. And he points out that the current generation's idea of nature is one they've generated from looking at a computer screen or a television, rather than actually being out there like Dave and poking around and mucking in the world. And we need more people who have a real understanding of nature, like Dave has developed, by actually interacting with nature instead of just seeing a picture of it.
Yesterday was Maya Bauer's birthday, and she was born in the woods. And her parents had a lot to do with the work on Bill Taylor and Janet Kalmar have been their parents, and rather different parents, but they have helped to put this into action. And some of the wood that is in this building, there's the wood that Bill Taylor has put here in early stages when we were forming WEFT as a unit.
Uh-huh.
And let me look at the time. 3 minutes. You want to say something significant about?
Make sure it's significant. Here's a question. Way back at the beginning, you talked about how the fruit and vegetables that we get around here, if they've traveled 1,500 miles, they were clearly picked long before they were fully ripe. So you talked about how we, for example, don't ever taste a banana that ripened on the tree. Now, you can go to the store and they will sell you what they call vine-ripened, for example, tomatoes. Is that just a trademark, or can you presume that those actually did get about as good as they're going to get on the vine before they were picked?
In some cases, that's true. I would say, however, that there are lots of alternatives that are locally grown tomatoes. I help out at Sola Gratia Farms, which is on South Philo Road, and they grow all sorts of vegetables. You can actually belong to a community-supported agriculture, CSA, where you give them some money to help get started in the spring, the buying the seed, fertilizer, planting, and then during the growing season, you get a share of the produce that's produced from that initial investment. And it's a very good operation because they also donate a lot of their produce to the food bank, so the people that don't get good, tasty food get a chance to.
I've actually been part of a CSA. You do need to know up front that they're going to give you a big bag. It's not like going to the store and you walk along and you say, "Oh, I like these things, and I hate artichokes and I hate these other things." It doesn't matter. You get some of them and you find something to do with them.
Well, you won't have to worry about artichokes here. We don't grow any in it.
I was trying to think. There is something they always put in there. You make. I can't even think. Never mind. They always give it to you as a side.
I found it rather interesting.
Mexican
we
food.
had tried plant vegetables that we hadn't ever eaten before, and they were quite good, but we just hadn't thought of growing that sort of thing. You also get food that's seasonable. So you get different food in the spring than you would in the summer, and different food in the fall.
One thing I think of, Jack looked at a plastic water bottle, and here we have the most unique water in the world, a very, very healthy aquifer, and we ship in water from New York and Colorado. I can't ever imagine that. I went to the city to say, can you encourage the water companies to take their water out of the aquifer here rather than ship it in? And they said, well, go to the water companies. And I'm not quite sure of the economics of this, but I can't imagine why we ship in water from out of state.
Tell me the difference between Dasani water and Coca-Cola. You can buy Coke cheaper than Dasani water. They're made by the same company, but Coca-Cola, of course, has its secret formula in it for less money than...
Unfortunately, fortunately, the sugar is being reduced. Lots of letters to food people to reduce their sugar, salt, and fat input. So go for the materials that are natural and not the ones that are boxed with all these things in them.
And with that, guess what? It's the top of the hour.
This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And
Jack Paxton, who is our guest. And
yes, there you go. And Dave on the board. We should mention, once again, if you'd like to find out about the video that the university put together that has to do with bad things that we're doing to the environment in the name of agriculture, it's called Price of Bounty. If you look it up for the University of Illinois, you should be able to find a copy of it online. The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers and no one else.